Hey everyone, Billy Strange here. Before we get started, just wanted to mention John had a problem with his microphone. I cleaned it up the best that I could, but you're going to hear a little bit of static when he talks. It's the best that I can do, but I wanted to keep this because I thought it was a good conversation. So hopefully it's not too annoying. Enjoy the podcast. Cheers, and let's get going. Welcome to Beyond the Gloves, Episode 10. I'm your host, Billy Strange, along with my co-host, John Sable, the best-looking man in sim racing. How are you today, John?
Oh man, that is quite the title. Have you been watching Gamer Muscle?
Well, yeah, I figured I could just kind of play off of what Gamer Muscle was doing, and, you know, I'm not going to disagree with him. That's why I have a face for radio.
Well, I mean, that works out well for this episode then.
Yes, it does. Because we're trying something a little different for Beyond the Gloves. We're doing an audio-only podcast. It'll help us kind of get these out a little quicker. So, we're going to post this. It'll be on your favorite podcast services as well as the website. And if everything goes okay, there might be a YouTube, something on YouTube to go along with this. If you'd like to support us, go ahead and hit up isrtv.com. You can find the latest in sim racing news there. And also hit up our forums. I think that's enough of the business end of the podcast. So, everyone gather around, grab a wheel, grab a gear, smash the throttle, and let's talk a little sim racing. Alright, John, so we know we've been mired in a lot of reviews lately, and really starting with Dirt 4, there have been a ton of racing game and sim racing related games put out this year. Thankfully, I think we're all done now after Gran Turismo Sport. Are we all done now?
Yes, I believe for the most part when it comes to the four-wheel variety. We have some two-wheel games coming up. But yeah, when it comes to wheels and pedals, I believe we are now done for the year.
All right. So with that said, I wanted to throw out a topic for us to have a quick discussion, see what our community thinks. What I wanted to say was, or ask is, does your past sim racing experience help or hurt you when driving a new sim? And the reason I got thinking about this was, especially after a GT Sport review, there seems to be, amongst most of the games released this year, a very split decision on whether it's acting in a realistic manner or is it not, and how people are either finding it great driving or they're struggling with the driving model in the game. And what I like to do is, first off, I like to listen to a lot of different opinions. I like a wide variety to see if I missed anything. And I also just find it interesting to see what people like and don't like. Beyond that, I like watching some of the video that goes along with it, because when somebody says they really like something or they really dislike something, I like to watch that video to see how are they approaching the sim, because sometimes you can tell, well, maybe they're overdriving the car, or maybe they're not hitting their apexes right. Things like that kind of inform me about maybe where the reviewer is coming from. And I'm wondering if when we struggle with the sim, if that is directly related to our past experiences in sim racing. So I'm going to shoot it to you, John. What do you feel like, how much of an influence does past sim racing have on when you're trying to adapt to a new sim?
I think it has a major impact. I mean, it's with all the different variety we have out here these days in sim racing. I mean, it's just so many different games. It's amazing. And then, when I say sim racing, I'm lumping everything in there. I'm lumping in the GT Sports, the Forzas, the F1s, all of them. And yeah, there's just so many different experiences that, it's hard to have them not interfere with one another, because as you stated before, each title has their own perspective, opinion on what driving should be, even though everyone's trying to kind of go towards, I kind of feel like the same point they're all driving towards, but it doesn't always happen along the way. So Yeah, I mean, I think it plays a major role in the what you have driven and what you're used to. I mean, it's really fascinating, and I would love to get a really straight answer from people because we've kind of asked this question before, like on the live show, and I don't know. I kind of don't fully buy everything I get, but we've asked people, like how many of you people actually, you people, that sounds good. How many of you people go and drive a lot of different titles? Do you bounce around a lot, or do you just focus on one? My experience personally, I like to kind of focus on a title for a while. If it, left to my own devices, right now, like you said, we've been hopping around a ton between different titles, so I have not been stationary at all. But, if I'm not reviewing stuff or, working on, doing a lot of the work stuff just on my own, I like to try to focus on a title. And when you do focus on a title, then you get pretty used to how that drives. And, well, before I lose my original thought there, what I was getting at is I'm curious how many people jump around, and then the people that jump around, how really deep do they get into each title? Because if I really, some people have claimed like, oh, get in there and you get really deep into it, but I kind of almost throw up a shenanigans because you have to spend time with a title to really dive into it and really, do a bunch of races where you see how the setups work and, check out a bunch of the, all the cars or a bunch of the cars. It takes a lot of time, and I do think there are some people that do buy about everything out there, and they skim around and they skip, and maybe don't give things as much time as they should, or maybe you kind of just quick to draw a conclusion. And then you got other people that spend all their time on one thing, and the idea of having to change to something else is just too much for their mind to get around, and it can be tough. And I mean, like I said, I struggle from time to time jumping from different titles, and I really have to spend a fair amount, as much time as I can with it when we do these reviews, understanding that we try to get them out at release or prior to release. And my opinion varies greatly during that time reviewing it. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing a live review, or even sometimes people will, when we do a first look, people are like, "What's your opinion?" And it's like, my opinion right now probably isn't my opinion is going to be in a few days. So right. I'm just not going to give it, wait for the review. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, you mentioned something in the very beginning there about how all the Sims are kind of going in one direction, right? They're all trying to achieve the same thing, but I know for a fact they all go about it a bit differently, whether that's a tire model, a handling model, suspension. I just there's so many things at play, and it seems to be which part of that does each developer prioritize. And so in pushing that direction, I think you're seeing a lot of games that we wouldn't traditionally call Sims having more sim-like elements to them. And I'm wondering if that push in that direction will eventually lead us to a point where we can hop between sim to sim to find a common ground, and there won't be that big of an adjustment period. We're not there yet, but I'm curious if everybody finally gets to that one point where, wow, we have finally hit that spot where it really feels like everybody's kind of honed in on the same thing, and then we have to figure out, what is left, what differentiates the games, but that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I mean, to some degree, I feel like we're getting there with some of the titles that use our favorite word, tire flex. I really got to find out a better word for that, Billy. We need to ask the community. We need to call something funny. I don't know. Getting closer to the octopus. I don't know. Something.
Wow.
Something other than, oh wait, that doesn't probably work out very well either. Anyway, something other than tire flex. Especially after the GT Sport review, people are like, there's tire flex, don't call it tire flex. It's like, there's visual tire flex.
There's visual tire flex. That does not mean
physics.
That there is actual physical, in physics, tire flex. That's a whole different scenario. It's the same problem we have when somebody sees somebody driving and there's lag in the monitor with a wheel on the screen. That is visual lag. That is not lag in the feel, of what you're driving. That just is visual lag
Yeah,
that the developer has an issue with, not
Input.
lag is input lag. Thank you. I was
Yeah.
struggling for the word. So that's a whole separate issue again that we could dive down another rabbit hole with.
Sure. But back to the initial point, I do feel like those titles that are really starting to catch on to something with the tire flex, talking about like Assetto Corsa's, iRacing's latest cars, Automobilista, Project Cars 2, some of the stuff in Race Room.
Race Room, yes.
There's definitely those titles there where I can jump from one title to another, and there is a general universal feel. I can feel what the car is doing, and I can get pretty quickly on my braking points and things like that. Now, also, let's be fair. These are ones that have been around for a long time. It's been a slow burn on the development process. So, I definitely have more time with those. But, but then again, to counter that, look at Project Cars 2. That's definitely a title out of all those I have the least amount of time with, partially because, we got it, reviewed it, played it heavily for the review, but, then had to jump off and do these other reviews. So, but, even that one, I was able to jump in, and I wasn't making very strange looking mistakes. Something that I was making, quite honestly, when I was playing GT Sport, working on that review. I had some times where I felt like I was really struggling. I know this in the review too. Really struggling with braking points, or even where exactly my car was at on track. I kept on going into turn 1 Interlagos. I was just like having a hell of a time between braking points and making sure I wasn't getting out too wide and this and that. So, it's,
right.
I do feel like we are heading to a bit of a common feel along some of the titles, and there's just others that aren't quite there yet. But I feel like they're all heading the same direction.
And that's, again, you bring up a good point that kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. You struggle with GT Sport initially, and I didn't.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, GT Sport lined up with me really well, and I think that's a little bit of a driving style difference, and I also think that's just not how well we adapt, because I think we both adapt pretty well when we're jumping around from sim to sim, but I just think that's what you've spent a lot of your time in versus what I've spent a lot of my time in. And for me, GT Sport, while there are things about the physics and the handling model and the tire flex that are not what I would consider sim-like, there is a sim-like quality in there somewhere that I initially felt comfortable with, barring that first hour of kind of getting your settings and bearings with everything. But that's how I kind of feel when I jump on a sim and can grab a car that I should be kind of remotely familiar with or have an idea how it should drive. If I can adapt fairly quick, then there is at least something, there's some quality in there that is sim-like in the driving model. Now, when you start pushing GT Sport to the limit, I think that's where the flaws really show up. Front-wheel drive cars seem to be very interesting to drive. A lot of people don't seem to really care for the way the front-wheel drive cars are.
I don't know whether to commend them on doing a really good job of catching the realistic torque steer of a front-wheel drive car, or to say that they've gone and made it, too severe. I have a front-wheel drive car in real life, and my GTI, and man,
it doesn't seem to be quite as strong as what they're portraying in GT Sport.
Yes and no. I mean, I was about to get to, it's like, if I go and I try to really gas up going around a corner, man, the stability control stuff will hop on, nannies will hop on in no time. So, I mean, it's kind of bad in that car, but then again, I drive a Ford, the Focus, which I keep up with Motor Trend and all the car reviews out there, and, that car was really heralded as, this thing it barely has any torque steer for a front-wheel drive car. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. Yet
Interesting.
I go and I drive it at Brands Hatch in the N300 race before they changed it back to a standardized car. And man, I was waiting forever to put down the gas, waiting for that car to straighten out because it had a ton of torque steer. So, like I said, it's kind of, I don't know what to say about that yet.
Right. That's a good point. So I guess kind of to summarize my thoughts, since we've got kind of your position on that. I've kind of given mine a little bit, but I really think that, well, it's a double-edged sword really, because I think that your past experience can help you quickly adapt to something, especially if you've played a lot of different games or sims. I think if you stick to one sim, I think it hurts you when you try something else, because you have no experience to draw back on. Okay, this isn't doing what I expected. I need to change this up. It's kind of like when I went from racing on a dirt oval to doing road racing. I already had an idea of what I was supposed to do, but I needed to refine what I was doing on a road course. Like, I wasn't scared of getting the car sideways or pushing the car over the limit. It's more of what refining my apexes and shifting points and that kind of stuff, which is, not something you typically do on a dirt track. Your driving style is different. So I kind of feel like that experience combined with my sim racing allows me to adapt very quick. I'm not going to be the fastest guy on the planet, because I do play a bunch of different sims. I think if I focused on one, I could be really quick at it. Still may not be the top, but I think I could be, in the top 1 or 2%. I think it hurts me because I bounce around so much that I am not one of those top players. So for me, it's a double-edged sword, but it was very interesting watching, especially the Project Cars 2 reviews, the Forza reviews, and the Gran Turismo reviews about how somebody really disliked something, and yet I'm watching. I mean, it's obvious the mistakes that they're making in the sim, and it always kind of popped in my head as like, I wonder if that's because they've played something else so much and they just don't know. And because they've played that other title so much, that to them is what is realistic. And I always think that's kind of a nebulous term, that realistic part of this sim racing thing, is because our experiences shape our idea of what is realistic. Most people don't have the background in both the real world and in sim racing to make those decisions. You look at like a Nicky Tim or something like that, and that's a guy that probably could tell you, hey, that's not right, this is.
Go watch him.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. I mean, I have it to a degree, but I do not have the depth and experience that he does on a road course, driving GT3 and GTE and all these other different cars. Didn't he do the Porsche Cup cars and stuff like that?
Yeah, but I mean, exactly what you said though, and it's what I talked about earlier about how, like, people tend to get into a game and need to kind of, really need to go deep with it before they really start. Throw around the opinions. That's someone.
I need about 10 hours.
Yeah, I mean,
I need about 10 hours to really make an informed opinion.
Absolutely. But then you look at someone, like Nicky on the real life side. He's gone deep. He's driven up from, I assume, karting to cars, and driven a bunch of different cars along the way. That's someone who can formulate an opinion on real world, and then take that over to sim racing, where it's, again, if you're going to go and you got to spend time with the game, and then going off what you said, unlike you. You have that real-world racing experience in on dirt with wing sprint cars, and also you've done some, pretty quick shifter car type stuff. Where I've only done the show up and drive a kart, and I've done the Mario Andretti thing and IndyCar experience in Charlotte. So I'm much more limited, and people say like, well, we'll get feedback on the YouTube comment section, my favorite, saying that like you don't know what real is, and it's like you're right, I don't necessarily. I am building on experiences like you said, but those experiences include like I said, a tiny tiny bit of real world, a lot of sim racing, and then also a lot of time as a very hardcore racing fan who watches and listens to a lot of this stuff and really takes seriously the feedback that drivers give. And really, when I watch a race, I'm like, I'm watching in the hands, I'm seeing what they're doing and how they're pushing and braking marks and stuff like that.
I mean, it's something I learned with sprint cars. You can learn a lot.
Yes.
By watching other drivers on the outside and watching video and listening to what they're doing. I learned a lot by just standing in the infield while waiting to qualify at different tracks and just listening to drivers as they were going around the track and getting an idea of what I had to do. You know, you don't need to drive every car on the planet, and you don't need to drive every racetrack on the planet to be able to say that feels right and that feels wrong. Just like in sim racing, you don't need to drive every sim to say that feels correct and that doesn't. I think if you have enough experience in a variety of different things, you have a good idea. Are you going to be the most perfect and the most best at it? No. But you have a really good idea what it's supposed to do. And for somebody to claim that, well, you've never driven that specific car before, so how do you know? Well, you don't need to necessarily. Now, if you had driven that car, you probably have a tiny bit more insight of the nuances of what the car does. But as a whole, your past experiences, as long as you have some, should inform you, hey, this thing feels right, this doesn't. I think, you look at a Kyle Larson in the real world, the guy can jump in just about anything. It's no different than Mario Andretti back in the day, or a lot of these other drivers. A lot of these drivers bounce around, and I think you're finding that in sim racing as well. You can find these sim racers like a Ray Alfalla that can primarily drives the stock car stuff, but he's done some road racing.
Well, I mean, he was in the drivers' road racing world championship for a number of seasons and years.
Right.
So I mean, there are definitely, man.
I could see that. Well, I guess what I was getting at is I could see that guy. I could see Ray giving an opinion about this is close but not quite, or yeah, this feels pretty good in a car he has limited to no experience in.
Sure. And but then it's a real double-edged sword, because then you get other people that I feel like just can adapt to anything. They can figure out how to be fast. It's funny watching the F1 2017. They've been having this F1 esports stuff. There's some names in there, and these are people who've been in R Factor and iRacing and stuff like that. That are just they're able to bounce around and able to drive fast. Something that was really fascinating when I was at E3. I was talking with Thomas from Fnatic, and we were talking about the R Factor 2 E race they had with the Formula E series, and I won't name here, but he was just talking about how some drivers drive from feel, and some of these other drivers, it's purely with eyes. They can go and you can give them a wheel with no force feedback, and they will just go out there and they will just knock it out of the park lap after lap, because they can visually do that and they
Sure.
don't need the feel. So yeah, I mean, it's
well, you're always going to have people that are better, right? You're always going
Absolutely.
to have people that are just better at something, and I still throw those people into this equation. But they obviously have the ability to adapt really well.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I mean, getting back to the original thing, it is fascinating, and it is something that, like, for example, when we go to new titles, you take some parts of what you know from other things with you, and some things you just gotta leave behind and see what the game gives you. A point that you brought up earlier that I thought was fantastic, and maybe why you got going with GT Sport a little faster is, maybe you start off a little more conservative and a little more smoother, where, I was thinking back to, and now we do ISR TV Thursday night racing league over on iRacing with the Pro Mazda cars, and we had a race a few weeks ago at Imola, and I showed up right before the start, one beer in me, and and I turned about 5.
As you should.
As you should, yeah. And I turned about 5 practice laps, and I spun on every single lap, because when I get out there, I'm pushing. I'm trying to find
Sure.
the braking spots. That's just how I drive. And also, to be fair, we're driving a Pro Mazda and we were running max downforce, so you really gotta hustle those cars,
Right.
To make lap time. You gotta get in there really hard. And so I 5 practice laps, 5 spins. I didn't set a real lap. Went out there, qualified decent, and then the race, finished second. Kept it on the track, no issues, had a good race. So, there's times, and I had that with GT Sport, where I went in there and I did my traditional, okay, let's go hard, and I struggled, and I had to really work on backing it down to start to really feel more what the game was giving me, and then to start, form an opinion of it, and then work my way trying to speed myself back up.
Again, excellent points. That's a good way to kind of cap it off. Is we all have different driving styles as well. So I think that I don't know. I just found it interesting watching people adapt that I know play other sims or other racing games as well. Either somebody coming from the hardcore sim racing scene and playing something like a GT Sport or a Forza, or somebody that's a little more Forza or Gran Turismo based and trying maybe like a Project Cars, or even trying a sim that's not necessarily new, like an iRacing or an R Factor 2, Automobilista, Race Room, something like that, and seeing their perspectives as well. I just find it fascinating. It's very interesting to see what we all consider to be realistic and not realistic, and what we have fun with as a sim or a game as a whole. So yeah, I think that kind of works out well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you dropped someone who had never, I don't know, this is such a weird, thing I'm trying to say here, but say if you took someone who has like the skill level that like you or me have, or anyone who's halfway decent, and you drop them into a sim for the first time ever, and it's only that sim, and that's all they have access to, I bet they think that's going to be pretty sweet.
Sure.
I mean, it's just like the perspectives really do make the whole industry a little more uppity than it should be.
Well, yeah, and that could get into another topic about how reviewers look at a sim or a racing game versus like a first-person shooter or something like that. But that's another topic for another day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this has been a good discussion. I'd be interesting to see what our viewers and listeners think of something like this. So, yeah, good topic. Thanks for hanging out, John.
No problem. I think we stayed on topic.
We tried. I tried to keep us pointing in the right direction. How about that?
That sounds good. I mean, it's amazing how you start up one topic and they just before you know it.
Yeah, it just starts triggering something else. We'll call that what is it? Analysis paralysis.
There you go. Sounds about right.
All right. For John Sable, I'm Billy Strange. Thank you so much for listening or watching. For all the latest in sim racing news, you can hit up isrtv.com. You can also support us by watching our YouTube videos. Take care, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Man,
how's that for a intro?
That's an amazing radio voice.
Shit.